Hello. Welcome back to Let's Talk Ray Bradbury. If you have not subscribed to our channel, please do. So here we are, back at it, working our way through the stories of Ray Bradbury. We are up to story number 34 of 100 in this collection. This title is The Big Black and White Game from 1945. So a brief synopsis. It is a hot summer day at a resort by a lake, and the black servants who work in this resort are playing against the white guest, I presume. It doesn't actually make that clear. Maybe they're just local whites, but it is a black and white game. And the whole scene is witnessed through the eyes of a young white boy, and he's in the stands next to his mother in the whites-only section of the stands. And he watches the black players sprint out onto the field, sort of looking effortlessly. He notices that the white men are getting a little bit older. They got pot bellies. They seem to be struggling, and they just don't look as graceful as the black players. To his mother's dismay, he's cheering for a black player named Big Po, whom he likes. Big Po comes up to bat. He lets the first two pitches go by. They're strikes, and then he connects with the third one and knocks it out of the park. The black players have a pretty lopsided lead. It's like 11-0 at this point. But after that, Big Po, he's not going to be too much of a showboat here. He intentionally strikes out a number of times, sort of not running up the score. But it's getting gradually apparent that the white players stand no chance in this game. Things are getting a little bit more rowdy. You hear more complaining from the people in the stand, his mother included, who sort of sees it as showboating. And then she also notices sort of the embarrassment of the white players being out there. It's like, why don't we just go home? And suddenly sort of downplaying it like, oh, the game's not that important now because we're losing. And sort of the scene is sort of gradually going downhill. Later in the game, a white player who has been sort of boastful the whole time, sort of trying to be Babe Ruth and sort of calling his shots and never making them, he connects and he slides into first base, which he shouldn't do, and he spikes the ankles of Big Po. The referee recommends that Big Po go sit down. He insists that I'm ready to play. But the ref also, who's calling the game straight, he calls the man out. And the man sits there and he argues about it. Big Po sort of keeps the peace. He says, you know what, he was safe. I didn't get him. Let's keep playing. So they keep playing. And the next play, the man tries to steal second base, and Big Po hits him in the back of the head with the ball. Immediately, there's a reaction. People storm onto the field. There's a fight. It's a near riot, as Bradbury describes it. And that sort of ends the day, and they go home. That night, the boy is in his room, and he hears music and cheering and laughter, and he sort of sneaks out in the house, and he observes a celebration. It's something jamboree. I forget the name of it was. It's a jamboree. And he observes that it's all black people celebrating. I'm not sure if this is sort of like a thing that was just for their community, but it does have the sense, in the boy's eyes at least, that he expected there to be other people there, people who looked like him, but there wasn't. It sort of turned to be a black-only sort of community celebration after the game. So, pretty clever story here. 1945. So, we're pre-civil rights, but we are sort of end of the Second World War. And you start reading, and Bradbury sort of tricks you into thinking that, from my perspective in 2021, that I'm reading nothing more than a story with outdated social norms. You see this a little bit. One of my favorite authors is H.P. Lovecraft, who had, in his earlier days, was known to be a bit of a racist, though he later married a Jewish woman and sort of repented a little bit of his views. But in a story like that, you notice things that are words you would not use today. And Bradbury makes you think that's what you're reading. But in fact, it's a lot more subtle and a lot more clever than that. we jump into the eyes of a boy who knows no racial prejudice. And then we start to see that it's a complicated situation where the black players are sort of tiptoeing around the game, trying not to be offensive and trying not to disturb the peace, sort of picking their battles, picking their fights, until that one moment when Big Po hits the man with the ball and it causes a fight, but it's described as a near riot. So it's almost as if he, by intentionally striking out 3 or 4 times, he created the leeway for himself to be able to get that revenge later without having a lynching being the result. But we're also seeing that in the story, but it's also more complicated than just whites versus blacks. It's a much more subtle situation. We see that there are decent people on both sides, and the boy is the first one, and the umpire is another one. The umpire is in fact white and calling the game safely or fairly, but the boy's the interesting one, and we see that his mother's not shying away with her prejudice, but he knows none. He is like kids today, or probably kids of most times, where you're cheering for your favorite players, and it's not down racial lines necessarily, because kids don't know that hate. And basically, the moral of the story is that if you don't teach your kids hate, chances are they may be able to make it into adulthood without sort of adopting your views of the world. But I think this is applicable not just to racial lines. I think that in life, regardless of who you are, unless maybe you're at the top of the food chain, you do have to sort of pick your battles, and you spend time tiptoeing around things. There's a lot of times where me, growing up, where I didn't speak out because, I don't want to get my face bashed in by a bully, and it's not, okay, so maybe it's not necessarily as big of a deal as race, but I think anybody can apply to this to their lives, where you do have to acknowledge that there's hierarchies and sort of pick your battles for the sake of survival. And I think that's something that everybody can relate to. And I think that's something that's important for us to remember today, because despite continuing racial tensions and gender norms tensions and things like that, we are in a world where it's more equal than it has ever been. And I think it's important for all sides to remember that everybody has their own struggles, and it's not easy to navigate this world. And I think if people realize that, I think things would be, on the whole, more peaceful. And instead of a person who may look like me, who has struggles, can sit there and wonder, why is all the focus on people with who look different than me, or people who have different gender norms than me? Why is all the focus on them, as if my life is a silver spoon because I'm white and male? Well, it isn't, I have my own struggles, and so do you, and so does everyone else. And I think it's important to remember that we're all in some sort of tricky position, playing the game, trying to navigate our way through a world where we're not in control and we don't hold the power. So, all right, guys, pretty damn good story. The Big Black and White Game, 1945, from the Stories of Ray Bradbury. This was story number 34 of 100, if you're reading along with me. We'll be back next time with ʻbrædɛbɛri from 1951, so tune in to check out and see what that is. See you later.